Okay, so there was a movie theater?
Movie theater right next to a soda fountain.
Mm-hmm.
One of the largest theaters on the northwest side of Chicago. So when the movie broke, when the movie was over, we'd have an influx. Lots of people.
Oh.
They'd be standing in line to get a table.
Yeah.
We had 25 tables, so there are a lot of people.
Wow.
And there were times when there would be 2 soda jerks, but more often than not, there was only 1.
Really?
So you worked pretty hard filling those orders.
Wow.
And of course, this soda fountain, I'll call it Pellegrini's, because that was the name of the 2 brothers that owned it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people used to call it the Sugar Bowl, but I always call it Pellegrini's. So when the theater broke, those tables were full. And we had not only the soda fountain, but there was a kitchen in the back that made sandwiches and things like that.
So it was like a Friendly's almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that's a good analogy, comparable thing. It was very busy. And when we had 2 soda jerks, we could keep up with it. But when I was there by myself, it was really tough to keep up with
Wow.
I remember one time I had 25 orders on the counter
Lined up,
waiting
yeah.
to be filled, lined up.
Unbelievable. And you knew more was going to be coming.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and so I really worked hard there.
Wow.
But I never was overwhelmed. I was always on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I enjoyed it.
That's really neat.
I enjoyed hard work.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah.
How about some fond memories of your college years?
Well, IIT, I got a full scholarship to,
Mm-hmm.
plus a little extra cash to cover expenses.
And you commuted, right?
I commuted on the subway. And it's kind of interesting the way I got this scholarship. They had something in Chicago at that time which was run by the newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, where they would have a college day where they would invite the top scholars from each high school to come for a day of just a meeting kind of thing, where there were also a lot of colleges represented. And we had to introduce, each one of us had to introduce himself to this group of colleges.
Okay.
And I said, I'm Lane Tech, and I want to go to the best, I went to the best high school in Chicago, and I want to go to the best college in
Wow.
Chicago, IIT, Illinois Tech.
Wow.
And that got me a full scholarship.
That's great.
I mentioned the fact that I, amateur magician and some of the other things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got my full scholarship.
Wow.
And it was a scholarship sponsored by the Pots and Pans Company, ECO,
Wow.
EKCO.
Uh-huh.
And it paid for 4 years, it paid all my tuition, plus I think I got an extra couple $100 for expenses.
Wow.
Maybe it was $700 for the year or something like that. So to me it was a fortune, and that meant all the money I had saved toward college I could now use for expenses and things.
So, Dad,
Yeah.
you said you went to Lane Tech?
Lane Tech High School.
Was that intentional that you went to the best high school, or was that the one that was just there and where you lived, or?
In Chicago there were 2 high schools that were what you'd call magnet schools,
Okay.
which were solidly in math and science and kind of designed for pre-engineering.
Okay.
And it was an all-boys high school at that time. It's no longer all boys.
Okay.
And it was, reasonable commute from my house. I used to take the bus.
Okay.
I was not too far from Wrigley Field, which is the baseball stadium in Chicago.
So you had to kind of apply or be accepted or something?
No, it was a public high school, so they had to take whoever
Okay.
wanted to go there, and I did. And they had the best math and science, which was great.
Served you well, yeah.
In fact, I took college algebra in high school, so I got advanced placement
Wow.
for that. And there were only two high schools, one on the north side, one on the south side, that were of that type.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt for me was the best high school to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was honest when I said the best high school.
Wow. So, if you had not gotten the full scholarship, it would have been a struggle to.
It would have been a struggle, but I had already saved enough money for at least for 1 year of
Okay.
tuition. Yeah.
All right, but it took a lot of the stress off for sure.
Sure did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Dad, getting back to these questions, what did each of your parents do for a living?
My dad was a draftsman, and he had gotten training from a 2-year technical institute in drafting.
Okay.
So he would draw up plans for electrical layouts in different factories and things like that.
Oh, I didn't realize it had an electrical component to it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And during the war, his work was considered essential to the war effort. And he was designing, laying out the electrical wiring for ships,
Oh.
Navy ships.
Hmm.
Um,
But did he lose that job then with the Depression, or how did that work out?
No, I don't think he lost that job. That was a job he had later.
Okay.
When the war started to boom, then they needed everybody, so they weren't laying off people at that
Okay.
time. His first job was with a company named Corn Products, and I don't remember what he did there, but it was probably of the nature of drafting again. But he was laid off from that job, and so that's when there were a couple of years of tough times.
Right. And he worked as a soda jerk himself, right?
Yeah, he worked, I think as a soda jerk, but he worked in that same place I worked, Pellegrini's.
Oh.
And
Before you did, or?
Yeah, before I
Okay.
did.
Yeah, I would imagine
When
so.
I was just a kid.
Okay.
He started off as a dishwasher there.
Oh, okay.
See, his sisters worked there as waitresses.
Oh.
So when they knew he needed a job, they talked to the boss, and he said, "Oh, sure, we can use him." So
Okay.
they started him in the kitchen. He did wash dishes at first, and I think he was a short order cook for a while, and then he worked as a soda fountain for a while.
Okay.
I wasn't.
You were a little one.
I wasn't cognizant of what was going on.
Right, because
so-
you were just a little one.
Yeah.
I did remember hearing that he would bring milkshakes
Yeah,
home for you.
I think it's a true story. I was an infant, and
Mhm.
he could bring a milkshake home at night, and while they were sleeping, he'd put the straw in my mouth, and I could drink the milkshake.
That's great.
Of course, the milkshakes in those days were very thin.
Oh, they were?
Yeah,
Huh.
they weren't thick the way they make
Oh,
them today.
okay, all right.
So it was more like chocolate milk. but,
Okay.
Yeah.
And your mom, did she work?
She didn't work when we were small kids, because she had to take care of the kids.
Right, that's the way it was back then.
Yeah, but then eventually she got a job as a secretary, typist for some kind of a company that was also war related,
Okay.
government related.
Okay,
So she worked for the government for a while.
okay. So did your family take vacations? And if so, what were they and where'd you go?
Well, the vacations were very short. What we would do is take trips to the lakes. There are a lot of lakes around Chicago.
Okay.
And so we would take day trips to the lakes. I think on a couple of rare occasions we stayed overnight with friends, people that owned a place or
Okay.
rented a place. And so we did that on rare occasions. We also had some car trips. The one I remember the most was when we would take a trip out to Connecticut.
That's a
because
distance.
we had relatives in Connecticut.
Oh.
And we never took any trips the other direction, west, only east,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where the relatives were.
Okay. How would you describe your parents' relationship? What do you appreciate about your parents' relationship?
Well, it was a strong family type relationship. Um, they never had any problems, marital problems. My mother was tough, so.
She was tough on him too.
Well, she was firm, let's say.
Mhm.
Loving but firm.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, Catholics, when two Catholics marry, it's usually a permanent thing with
Mhm.
close relationships, and that's what they had really.
Mhm.
They were both very religious. Um, never missed church, and it's amazing that they could get through the tough times they had. They really had tough
Really
times.
tough times, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember any specific stories they shared with you about some of the toughest times?
No, they kept them to themselves.
Oh, okay.
They didn't want to
Burden you
worry
guys.
the kids,
Yeah.
burden the kids with that kind of thing.
Okay. What value do you think your folks most instilled in you?
Hard work, certainly.
Mhm.
Um, the love of knowledge and education.
Mm.
So you got to remember that the immigrants, and my parents were not immigrants, but my grandparents were, and except for one. My mother's mother was born in Chicago.
Oh.
But immigrants always wanted to make better of themselves.
Mm.
So they stressed hard work, education, especially Polish people. They were all for that stuff, and so that's what I admire about them.
Okay. Were you considered, this is going to come as a funny question following what you just said, but were you considered rich, poor, or middle class? And, I know everybody suffered through the Depression, but with that in mind, most of your life, what would you consider that you grew up in? Rich, poor, or middle class?
Well, I would say middle class because we always had enough food on the table, and we always could
Live in a home, I
live in a
guess.
home.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we lived in an apartment at first, but then we finally got into a home.
Right. What was the address of that? I know it's Lawndale, but what was?
2942 Lawndale.
Okay.
And when we lived on Sawyer Avenue, it was 2944.
How
Sawyer
about
Avenue.
that?
Yeah. And you can Google them and you can see the houses.
That would be really cool to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you remember any stories you heard about your grandparents when they were children? Any stories at all that kind of struck you?
No, not when they were children. Well, my mother's mother died of tuberculosis when she was pretty young.
When your mom was pretty young. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my mother had 4 or 5 siblings that died.
I can't
She was
even
the
imagine.
only one that lived.
Yeah.
And her Uncle Richard was her half-brother.
Right.
Because my grandfather got married a second time after his wife died.
Right.
And Uncle Richard was the child of that marriage.
Right.
Um,
I had heard a story that, and maybe this is just what they did during those times, but that the stepmother made her get rid of all the pictures that she had of her mother.
Yeah, I've heard those stories, and they're probably true, but I never personally experienced any of that.
But she certainly did suffer through a lot as a child.
My mother had a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, all the parents and grandparents had hard times.
Right.
Depression
And people did die. Children died.
and there was a lot of disease. Tuberculosis was rampant.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. I was just curious. I knew Babsha.
yeah.
I wondered, she is your grandmother, but she didn't really speak much English. So how did you define that relationship?
She could speak enough English to communicate with me and the other grandchildren.
Oh, okay.
She just didn't. She preferred not to speak English, so it was
Okay.
harder for her.
Okay.
But
Did you feel close to her?
yeah, sure.
Okay.
We were all pretty close. The aunts sometimes were tough on my mother.
Yeah.
Uh,
What do you think that was about?
oh, I don't know. They're just they're all critical of each other.
Mm.
And being close, living close to each other didn't help, when you see each other so often.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I always heard that they sort of felt like she had stolen Wally. Wally from them.
well, I never heard that,
No?
and I think that's ridiculous.
Oh, okay. They were just critical.
Yeah, I think, they kind of resented their brothers leaving,
Well, that's what I mean.
getting married.
That's
yeah.
what I mean.
I
That.
mean, that was kind of that way with Uncle Henry, too.
Okay. So he was. They weren't very fond of her either. The
No,
wife of
'cause
Henry.
They wanted Henry to stay in the family.
Right.
They felt that they had put him through his education,
Oh.
and they wanted him to stay and contribute to the family.
Oh, so that's what they did. They worked to help the
yeah.
brothers go to college or the
Yeah.
brothers succeed. Interesting.
Mhm.
Was that pretty common of that day?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Wow. Okay. All right, we're shifting gears here a little bit, Dad. Tell about the naughtiest thing you ever did, and how did your parent discipline you? The naughtiest thing, if you can recall.
Oh boy.
Mom had an answer, by the way.
I, as a young kid, was always fascinated by fireworks.
Oh.
And I used to get these little firecrackers at 4th of July time,
Mm-hmm.
And I had a few that didn't work. They didn't pop.
Uh-huh.
So I had a pocket full of these things. And all this happened in the alley. The alley's
Okay.
behind our house.
Okay.
So I started a little bonfire and was putting these firecrackers into it.
Because you knew that would set them off.
Yeah. And that's, without my realizing it, it had started a fire on this adjacent pile of trash.
Oh.
So they had to call the fire department to put it out.
I've never heard this story.
Yeah, and that was very embarrassing.
Oh. What did your parent or parents say or do?
They heard about it, of course, and because it was a close
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And when I got home, or later that day, they said the police are looking for a young boy that started a fire.
Ooh. And you started sweating.
And that's all they said. I started to sweat. But that was one of my most embarrassing things.
Wow.
It was an accident.
Right.
If I had done it on purpose, it would have been different.
Right.
I had not intended it to happen. So that's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me.
Okay. Did you and your siblings fight? What did you most argue about or fight about?
Well, I never fought with my sister, Mary Ann.
Mm-hmm.
But my brother and I used to fight a little bit because I would build these things and he would knock them down. And of course that would anger me.
Right. But how about adolescent years? Did you?
No, we not really fight. We had a good brotherly relationship.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's good. You were closer in age to him.
Yeah, and of course he had some medical problems which made it difficult for the whole family.
Did it?
Yeah.
How did it affect your family?
Well, it didn't affect me very much, but my dad was, always trying to help him.
Yeah.
And they finally got some help with